What's up, everybody? Josh here, and Spencer, our other studio painter, is here behind the camera today.
Howdy, everybody.
There you go, off-camera voice. And today we're going to be doing a video about sort of the basic skills that we're going to be using all the time for our painting videos. And the miniature we're going to be painting is our brand new Mimic chest. So, if you want to check it out here, boom, boom. All right, so you can see very awesome Mimic chest, looking nice and crazy. Now we do have another piece of content planned for this miniature, which is going to be adding gross slime and drool effects to the teeth and tongue that you guys can take and apply to any miniatures that you may want to grossify in the future. But I thought this was the perfect example on how to paint something quickly to a pretty good standard. So we're just gonna jump right into it. So, all right, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a nice brown here. Everybody loves a good solid brown. And we are using our new paints. These are our big tester copy bottles, so don't be confused. They will be normal dropper bottle size at some point, but we're just using the big boys today. So this color is brown. Fancy name, I know, but we're gonna go ahead and base coat all of the wood to go ahead and get that started so it'll dry while we're focusing on our other details. But I know it's crazy. Brown for wood, just trust me. Okay, so I'm gonna mix this to a 1-to-1 ratio with water. And if we go to the overhead camera, I will go ahead and show you exactly what I'm looking for. So I always look for what I call flubber consistency, meaning I'm gonna put it on the palette and then mix it with water until if I spread it around, it tries to pull back. So you can see it's starting to pull towards the center a little bit. We're almost at the consistency I want. So I'm gonna add a little bit more water, and now you can see I pull it and now it goes back together. So that tells me I'm at a nice workable consistency. Usually with this paint, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, and with most paints out there, it's a 1-to-1 ratio as well. So, all right, let's get started. I'm gonna hop back down. And this is relatively simple. There's no magic sauce to it. I'm just gonna use the brush to aim for all the areas that I have with wood. Now then, we did zenithal prime this miniature, which means, as you can see, it's a mix of white and black primer. And all it's doing is giving me a slight foundation of light and shadow. Now, because the paint is thinned a little bit, it will dry a little bit semi-opaque or transparent, right? And that means we will retain some of the light and shadow. Now, if you don't have an airbrush or if you don't use rattle cans or anything like that, you're starting from pure white primer, you're starting from pure black primer, guess what? It's all right. Your results are pretty much gonna look nearly identical. It'll just have a little bit more contrast and definition by doing it the way that I'm doing it here. Or alternatively, you can use like a dry brush method like slap chop by putting white paint all over everything and dry brushing it. And you can also get definition that way. But it should be pretty evident by what I'm doing now that a lot of that light and dark is showing through the brown automatically. What's nice about the pigment that we're using in our paints is that it does not separate at all whenever you mix it a lot with water. Some paints do that depending on how they're made. And for us, that just means we get a really nice, smooth, contrast building application with just a really nice result. I'm not really worried right now about touching any of the edges of the metal necessarily because obviously they're gonna get painted metal. So it's not a big deal if I accidentally hit that. And I'm just sort of slamming through here. Really paint by numbers, whenever you think about it that way. Go ahead and hit our left side. That and right here. Now then, I'm gonna let that dry. Make sure it is ready to rock and roll with anything else that we have to do. Now, another large area, I always start with like the larger areas of a miniature anytime I'm doing base coats, just so that way it'll take the longest to dry. Even when the paint is thin like this, it doesn't take a long time to dry. All of the sections already are drying. The parts that are wet are just the crevices in between the grooves of the wood. So never be afraid to use wetter paint. It doesn't really slow you down that much, unless obviously you're applying like a giant wash or something, then that's pretty inevitable. But I'm gonna go ahead and take a darker purple here. This is our purple 3, which isn't the darkest purple, but just a nice solid cool tone purple. And the reason I'm gonna use a cool tone purple, which really isn't anything that fancy. It's just sort of a normal royal purple. I'm using that because I want to highlight the tongue with some lighter sort of pinkish reddish purples as we move our way up. So it'll just create more contrast. Anytime you can kind of switch color temperatures with blues and purples being cool, with some greens being kind of colder temperatures, and then reds, oranges, yellows being more warm, they'll always contrast next to each other and give you a nice result. So, all right, I'm gonna do the same thing I did before, and I'm gonna mix the paint to that sort of 1-to-1 ratio of water. And you can see too, I'm showing you here as it dries, you can kind of see the light and dark areas showing through as that paint is drying. And that's just the primer giving us a little bit of extra oomph on top of our base coat, which is cool. Now, the tongue obviously is way brighter than some of the sections of the wood, and that's just to our advantage, so that way when I come through with a little bit more of this thin paint, that it will apply evenly, not pool too much, hopefully, assuming I'm gonna apply it in the right spots, and then we'll get more contrast. You can see I'm gonna just slop it on here like so, and I'm gonna let gravity do most of the work. That's the nice thing whenever you're working with thinned paint like this. You don't have to really worry about the application portion as much as just letting gravity go into the crevices, and then it will dry on its own. So that's what I'm doing right here. And you can see the detail popping through without us trying to do much. Another good way to think about it too, I kind of talked to Spencer about this whenever we're working on stuff as well. Like, essentially, the more frequently you can leave yourself instructions in between individual layers of paint, the easier it is to be faster. So what that means, whenever we're looking at this tongue, right? So you can see in the lighter areas, it's created these ridges, and then it goes into the dark. Well, if I'm having to guess, right, where I'm gonna apply my highlights, it's probably gonna be where that lighter color is showing through. So if you're someone that primes with all white all the time, that's pretty easy to notice. If you're someone that primes with all black, you're just gonna be looking for where your light is reflecting. So like literally where the light source in the room that you are painting. So if you're using a light above you, or two light sources, which I always recommend, you'll be able to know where to put it to, right? But leaving yourself little information like that is always really useful. So, boom, that's pretty easy. We're gonna let that dry. So now I'm gonna take the same color and make sure I hit the little webbing here on the sides of the chest, where it is opening its maw. Is that the term that we should use, a maw?
I think so.
You think a maw makes sense? Okay, it's a maw. We're gonna go with a maw. Boom. Flip it over on this side as well. Look at that, that's crazy. Okay, and then on the inside, we have a whole mess of teeth. I think that's the industry term that you should use as a painter, is to say mess of teeth. So what I'm gonna do, we're not really gonna go in there and try and paint every single one of these. One, because how are you gonna reach the teeth? I mean, if you're not going to assemble this before painting, you know, some people like to do that, sure, you could tackle them, but you can't really see them all. So I know that we're gonna apply a wash on top of stuff here once everything is dry, so it'll be darker, it's in shadow, so I'm not too concerned with that. I'm gonna let that go ahead and hang out. Then, where all of the teeth are sort of popping out on the top there, that ridge, I'm gonna go ahead and take our purple and apply it as well. There is a little bit of brown paint wherever I was sloppishly throwing that brown paint on there, but guess what, it's not a big deal. It's also okay if this gets onto the teeth directly. We're gonna repaint the teeth before doing anything to them. So really, we're just looking for, you know, any bits that would be gums or mouth parts. I think that's probably a good way to put it. I'm gonna throw some of that purple. Look at that. So technically, we're at the majority of our base coating complete very rapidly. So now we just have the eyeballs, the metal bits, and the teeth. Crazy, I know. So I'm not sure which color to do for the metal necessarily. I like the idea of a bronze. I like the idea of a gold. I like a lot of ideas. Okay, so I think what I'm gonna do, maybe we do dark metallic for the trim, and then we'll do like a gold or a bronze or a brass or something for the eyelids. Does that make sense? I don't know. But then again, I don't know the last time I actually ran into a mimic in real life. So we just kind of have some you know, plausible deniability, I think is the term, for being creative. All right, so I'm gonna use this Vallejo Model Air metallic paint. I like it because it just goes on super smooth and very opaque. So I'm gonna use this to line, I hope I put enough on the palette there. I was a little conservative, but I'm just gonna line up all of our metal with it and then rock and roll. So here we go. This will be really easy. Now, when it comes to metallic paint, I don't care at all about trying to retain a zenithal. I know we've talked about it before, Spencer and I know being like, is there a way you can utilize it? I think we sort of did once, right? When we painted up the cars from our Lords of Lockhaven.
We figured it out.
Yeah, so I think one time we figured out how to like tint with the metallic through an airbrush, and it worked well on obviously a very large vehicle. Would be hard to pull off here necessarily, but that's kind of the only time ever I've found a way to really utilize a zenithal or any kind of undercoat for metal. Most of the time, which is what we're going to do today, you just paint it metallic and then you add some detail with the wash. So that's what we're going to do, and then we're also going to make it a little rusty to add some nice contrast between the purples and browns. But that's it. So we're just going to knock this out. Nice part about this is that it's not covered in a bunch of tiny little details for our metal. It's just literally straight lines. So, you know, have faith. You should be able to knock it out without too much issue. And then I'll make sure to get the handle here. And if you sort of slop out a little bit or color outside of the lines, don't worry. We're going to do, like I said, a bit of a shadow wash on top of stuff before highlighting everything back up. And that will allow us to sort of clean up any little oopsies. So don't worry. If you're an oopsie kind of guy, sometimes I'm an oopsie kind of guy. I know Spencer and I both have had days where suddenly something we've been painting for a few hours now is just reprimed, and we just don't talk about it, and we understand it was an oopsie kind of day. It happens, I would say, more frequently than you would probably think, really. I know back when I would do a lot more teaching, there were quite a few times where I would spend an hour into a video, sort of we're doing now, painting up a miniature to realize I hate whatever I've done, to literally scrap it completely while everyone at home is trying to follow along. Which, not, you know, the most fun to be like, okay, now I have to repaint it with them, but it isn't the end of the world. I think that is a confidence building thing as well, to kind of see somebody sort of scrap something and start over, because it's definitely not something that is scary, but with any luck, we won't have to worry about that today. So, boom, check it out. We got all of the silvers. Now then, I'm gonna go ahead and grab, I guess, a little bit of copper. We'll do the eyelids. I don't necessarily know if I want them to be purple, so I'll just kind of have them be a different color. So we'll do that. And then we have teeth. And we have eyeballs. And that's it. So, now then, a little bit more detail here. We can't be so quick to the draw as we have been with everything else, because there's not as much room. But this is also a Vallejo air color, correct? Yeah, so this is, well, they call it rust, but it's just kind of a coppery, bronzy color. Throw this on here. Maybe we highlight it to gold at the end to make it look like our mimic has some very fancy eyeshadow or something. You gotta stay cool as a mimic. If we're talking about mimic ideology here, or whatever the term should be, right? If you were a mimic, would you want to look like a very pristine chest, or would you rather look like a very like beaten or worn chest? I guess it depends on the environment, right? Like if you're a mimic that's hiding in a treasury to try and catch thieves and eat them up, maybe you want to look really nice. Or if you're a mimic in a dungeon, maybe you want to look dingy. I think I answered my own question. Look, sometimes I worry about the wrong thing. Today is one of those days. Okay, cool. So, awesome, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a nice middle of the road tan color. Guess what we call it? Tan. I know, very, very wild naming conventions. But I'm going to take this tan, base coat the teeth and the eyes. I made that sound way more interesting than it probably is. But after that, we are 50% complete with this miniature. All base coating is done. We're gonna add a little bit of an all-over wash. This is what we do here. You can't see it. Spencer's doing it behind the camera too. We know where we're at. Okay, he did it. He wasn't doing it, and then he did it when I did it. So that's how you know we work as a team here.
Started doing it.
Look, he'll even speak for himself.
Couldn't help myself.
Couldn't help himself. Too much fun. All right, here we go. Let's do some teeth. Exciting mimic dentistry here. Wow. Have you ever seen teeth look so teeth? Come on, be honest. These definitely are teeth, okay?
Some pretty teeth.
Look at that. Okay, all right. Look, don't just say things to try and make me feel better, okay? I get it. I know what's going on. Look, this is the 8th time I've had to paint this miniature. We have filmed this so many times. Every time, about 30 minutes in, Spencer just has to say something that hurts my feelings, and, you know, I just storm out. So I'm hoping today is the day that he just chooses to be nice to me. So that's all.
Still thinking about it.
Okay, he's still thinking about it, but look, we're just gonna hope today is not the day, and we can get it done. All right, so like I said, right, a whole mess of teeth. Okay, flock of teeth, a congregation of molars. These aren't molars. Congregation of canines, right? Not dogs, but you understand. So I'm just going to kind of drag the brush on top of them. Because guess what? Wherever that brush is hitting the top, that's all you're going to see anyway. Right? We don't need to go in there and try and do 360 no-scope teeth painting. That doesn't make any sense. All right, we got our teeth ready to rock and roll, and I'm going to go ahead and go in on the eyes. Now we're going to do, like, you know, very upset and irritated red eyes. But I'm going to go ahead and coat them with this, so that way we have a little bit of something to catch some light whenever we go in to do that. And I'm not trying to get 1000% perfect coverage here. I know we're going to slap a wash on top of everything, depending on what the object is, and that's it. All right, so, wow, crazy look, completely base coated. Now, hey, if you're in a hurry and you gotta throw this at some players and you're a dungeon master and you're like, I've got, you know, 30, 45 minutes, I need to just get some color in here. That's not the worst it could be. You know, throw a little black on the base. Sure, it isn't gonna win an award. You'll win an award in speed from me. Like, congrats, you're a really fast painter. But it's not terrible, we have some definition. However, what we're gonna wanna do is throw a little wash on top. So I don't necessarily use pre-made washes. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you like to do, by all means, have fun. Go ahead and do that. But I'm gonna add a cool black to the palette. So we have a color here that is mixed with a little bit of blue to give you a nice cool contrast. And this has a bunch of warm colors on it, a lot of brown. And so I just wanted to pick up in the shadows a little bit more. So I have that on the palette. And I'm probably gonna use that actually for the shadow for everything. I'm gonna get a little bit more of our base color purple here that we used on the tongue as well to mix with that. I'm gonna mix it with the brown and then with the purple to do 2 different washes. And that's it. So whenever I'm mixing a wash, I just add like twice the amount, sometimes 3 times the amount, depending on the color I'm working with, of water. So rather than our normal 1-to-1 ratio, I usually go a little bit thinner, obviously, because we want it to just wash all over everything. So I'm gonna take some of that purple here and a little bit of the cool black. Now I have a very, very cool tone, blobbly, it just looks black in the background, but very cool tone purple. It's very, very dark. And I'm going to wash this.
Do you want to maybe show the consistency of the wash?
Wow, Spencer, come on, dude. Who do you think I am? I
I
want some secrets, okay? You want to talk about flubber consistency? You can spread this out all over the place, and look, it always wants to go back in the middle. But that is pretty much on the palette the consistency you're looking for. I didn't mention the palette, did I? So we don't use like a pre-made palette or anything like that. We literally use burger sheets of wax parchment paper. Very fancy, I know, on top of a sponge in a little dish. I don't even think this is like an actual palette. This is like a weird little lid thing that I use. But we use wet palettes functionally here, meaning we aren't trying to save paint. We just use what we are using in front of us, and that's it. I mean, you obviously could save your paint, but we just use it to get mission accomplished. So I'm applying our dark purple wash all over the tongue, and that is going to add extreme contrast. If I had like a cool audio effect, look, we will get there eventually, and Spencer can hit buttons and I'll get echoes and voice modulation like I'm being held hostage, all that stuff. But it's just gonna get dark, that's it. There's no crazy secret to it, and then that will allow us to go back on top with the base color and then some highlights, and we'll have nice definition. And then I'm also going to apply this color. And I know, it's a dark purple. Why would we apply it on top of teeth? because it's just going to be shadow, that's just what it is, okay? Don't freak out. It's not going to look purple when it dries. And you can see already, it doesn't look purple. It's just going into the grooves of the teeth. The congregation of canines, okay? Throw that on there. I'm not going to apply it to the wood or the metal because I want to use a brown. Now, you could. There's really no rule saying, you know, why don't I just apply it on everything? It wouldn't really ruin anything for us. It would look totally fine. But I'm going to do the exact same combo that I did before, but just now with the brown. So I'm mixing the brown with the cool black to that same consistency that Spencer had me so kindly show everybody. And now we're going to put it on top of everything. Now, I don't think I put enough water on there, but guess what? I'm still going to apply it all. I know, this is crazy. Just hear me out. Hear me out, guys. Okay, here we go. I'm applying it, and then I'm just going to take literal water on my brush and then scooch it around. It's not going to dry on me fast or anything like that, because our mimic chest is dingy. All right, this is a dingy chest. I'm not trying to insult the mimic. I'm sure if it wanted to be, it could be very clean and put together, okay? But it's just been neglected in some dust, waiting for adventurers for quite some time. So it isn't pristine. And I'm just throwing this all on top of everything. The one nice thing about what we just did, because we mixed the cool black into our darker purple, which is already pretty cool, meaning it is more blue than it is red, it's going to create nice contrast since I'm using a dark brown wash. So we're sort of creating two competing temperatures on top of the entire palette here, which is nice.
I think that's something we'll probably go into on the Patreon.
Yeah, so on the Patreon and everything like that, I'm sure on top of everything else we do, we'll always focus sort of on more so the art and color theory side of stuff, so we can focus on that more. Now then, our first month on Patreon, so one of the very first videos we're going to do that has to do with technique is all about brush control and focus. However, we can also do stuff too like color theory and pretty much everything that helps you be a faster, more confident painter. I know one time Spencer and I had a conversation where I was like, you know, one of the reasons why people end up being slower when they paint or not as confident, it's because they don't have expectations that translate to what they're painting. So what I mean by that is when you're constantly sort of unsure about how you should paint something, the nice thing about what we're doing, right, is that you get the miniature in the mail and then we say, hey, here you go. Here's how I painted it. This is coming from the studio painters, right? This is the technique that we would do. It makes it very easy, but sort of subliminally, I'm tricking you. What we're doing is we're brainwashing you into learning different little tips and tricks that you can just do on your own, right? And so a lot of these different things that I'm mentioning, like I'm using a cooler purple, so that way it creates more contrast against warm things. So eventually, when, you know, I'm not hanging out with you and we're not painting the same thing, and you're sitting there and you go, hey, this is a warm color, maybe I can use something cool tone to make it pop. Boom, there you go. I brainwormed you, and now you know these little secrets, right? So that's kind of something too that we're trying to convey, and even with the paints that we use, all of these things sort of tie together, so that way you don't have to necessarily think about it, and you'll get really good results without having confusing expectations or results. It's just boom, there you go. So, all right, all of this is drying. The tongue is pretty much dry, so I think we can go in and start working on the tongue. Now then, it's pretty dark, right? He is a lot darker than he was a couple seconds ago, which is cool. That's exactly what you want. You want shadow. So I'm gonna take purple number 3. I know, shocker, it's what we've been using this whole time. But I'm gonna also put out our second purple color we're gonna use. So the next one that we're using is a very warm tone purple. This is purple number 1. So it is a brighter purple. All of our colors currently go from 0 to 4, 0 being the lightest version. If we ever have to come out with a -1, so be it, okay? We don't really think we need to. But purple 1 is gonna be pretty much as close to a pastel version, right, of the color, because the only time we typically added white to any of our paints was when we hit the 1 and 0 area. But I know that this color specifically doesn't really have any white. So this is getting us closer to a purpley magenta. And then purple 0 being a, if I'm remembering correctly, it is close to a sort of deeper bubblegum pink, but we're going to use it in a minute. You'll see it. No big deal. But we're ready to rock and roll. So I have a little bit crisper brush on my palette. I've been using, I wouldn't say that this brush isn't any good, okay? It isn't, I mean, it's all right. All right, look, I'm not going to bully the brush. It still has its
job.
It's done its job just fine, okay? But it's not like super sharp, so I want to move into a fresher version of the exact same brush. Way sharper, okay? Look, I'm not trying to pick a favorite child, but look, you see the difference, okay?
What kind of brush is that, Josh?
A really good one. Is that how we play this game? So, we like to use currently the Vinci Miniature Maestros, which are Series 76. There is a Series 72. It's a little bit different, okay? We like the 76, not a big deal. Before that, though, we were using Series 10 and 35. 35 was very long. Series 10 was only a little bit shorter than these and a little bit thinner. But these are really cool. They are thick enough to hold really wet paint, which is what we use all the time. And they're long enough to have a sharp enough point to where you can get in and do a lot of good detail work or freehand if you need it. And it only comes in 2 sizes, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Well, there's only a size 2 is the smallest, and then there's size 4 and I think a 6. So if you go online and you're like, I want a size 0, where is it? Don't be confused, and don't worry. It just literally doesn't exist. So, all right. So I'm gonna grab some of this purple, and we're gonna start bringing up some highlights. So, like I was saying before, I'm looking for the instructions that I left behind. Now, look, okay, I always rest my pinky whenever I'm painting like this, and I wipe it on my thumb because I'm an animal. All right, I definitely do not lick my brush. These are also not non-toxic paints because they have real pigment in them, so you don't want to lick your brush. But I do wipe it on my hand as a little, make sure I don't have too much on my paintbrush little checker. So what I'm doing is I'm just going back across the top of these different areas where that purple is coming through brighter, so that way I know I'm building a transition or a gradient to my highlight, which is relatively simple. It's not really going to matter if your brush strokes aren't like perfectly smooth at this stage, specifically because this color I'm applying is so close to the color with the wash on top. So it isn't going to be a jarring difference. And then I'm going to stop applying this color about halfway down, because I would say right about, let's see, we'll look at it from the side. So right about there, it starts to hook back in. That's all in shadow, so I don't care about that. What I do care about is right about here at the bottom, the hook, and I'll start highlighting again from there, because I feel like we're going to actually get some light, and that's where it's going to start popping back out. I'm a big fan of don't paint what you can't see, and that also ties into whenever you're building contrast with things. Just stop highlighting every single detail, and you'll get way more definition and way more depth. So, going back on top of the gums, on top of our teeth here, easy peasy, and then the sides here of the mouth, little webbings. I'm not applying a lot of this at once. I always try and aim for like 50 to 30% of the previous color to still be showing. So if you are continuing, yes, words. If you are highlighting stuff continually, okay, or continuously. Spencer, it has been a long day, okay? I just don't appreciate you laughing at me. He literally has written the word continuously now on a sheet of paper and is holding it above his head like an extreme friend, okay? He's being very friendly to me. So if you're continuing to highlight something and you're leaving a little bit of the previous color, it shows, okay? So it just helps you get more contrast through. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take our 2 purples now and I'm mixing them 50-50. Crazy. Still some water in there. But what I want is a nice color to bridge in between our base color and now our highlight, okay? And you can see on the thumb, look, it's brighter. I'm not trying to trick you, okay? It's brighter. I am trying to trick you, but you'll figure it out. I'm tricking you into being an awesome painter. So.
This is the nice version of the video, Josh, not the main video.
Oh, sorry. I'm trying to encourage you to be a better painter. Is that what it is? Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm applying more of this color to the exact same areas where we were before. I'm applying less of it every time, and I'm just paying attention to the ridges as I go through. I'm also going to put it directly down the center of the tongue because since our light source is pretty much coming directly from the top, that center is also going to be bright. You could leave it as a shadow. I think it's a little bit more realistic to sort of follow where stuff like that is going to get a highlight. And then I'm just sort of briefly highlighting the edge of the tongue moving down. Still pretty dark. Obviously we have probably 2 more. I say obviously. No, you wouldn't know what we're doing until we're doing it. So I plan on, there we go, that's an easier way to put it, highlighting 2 more times on top of this. So we're gonna go with that sort of magenta color directly, and then the purple number 0 as the final one. But we're gonna keep rendering this out or bringing in brighter and brighter colors as we move through. Side of the tongue a little bit. Bring up the webbing on the side of the mouth more. I'm actually just gonna drag the side of the brush like that to help bring it out. Same thing here. And thinking of this in terms of like visual interest, I always sort of say like miniatures have usually two features that you would pay attention to. So they have 2 dominating things that kind of dictate whatever it is, right? So for this, I would say it's a chest. So it's either going to be the metal or the wood. And I think we can bring detail and attention to both. And then obviously it's the mouth with the crazy tongue, right? The teeth are pretty small. There's a lot of them, okay? No disrespect to the amount of teeth. But the tongue is also sort of this big crazy thing wagging at you. So spending more time on the tongue, and then probably the wood, we'll figure it out as we go, but that's probably where we're gonna invest more time than the metal, right? Or like highlighting of the teeth. Those things are gonna look good enough on their own, so it's not like you have to really invest a lot of time or anything special to them, really. Now then, I'm gonna go directly with our purple number 1. All right, so this is gonna be brighter, for sure. As we build our color back up. Always working with it a little bit thinned so that way it can dry quickly and I can build up more if I need it.
Still leaving that 30%, it looks like.
Yeah, I'm leaving a little bit more and more on this top portion directly, so like right sort of on this rounded edge. I am, of course, breaking the rule I'm telling you about. That makes sense. But I'm applying a little bit more than I normally would just because it is hitting the most light, or the most light is hitting that area, rather, right? So either way, I know that part is just going to be brighter. So I am paying attention to that. Now then, if you were spending a lot of time on this miniature and you weren't trying to get it done relatively quickly like we're doing today, one thing that you could do is sort of think about the shapes, the basic shapes that the part of the tongue is. So because we have these nice sort of curved surfaces, if I tilt it a certain way, I think we can tell. Boom, okay. So you see how they're like circular, spherical, right? So these would be cylinders, or like 2 tubes, okay, being twisted and contorted into that shape. So because we know that, we know the center or the middle of those cylinders would be the brightest. And so that's kind of what we're doing with this paint. And if you were spending a long time, you could render out those shapes more and more and more, and then it would just look very realistic by the time you're done. Or you could do like what I'm doing now and just look at what you applied before and then put a little bit more on top, and making sure you're doing less and less every time you add a new color, and you will get really nice definition. So that's kind of the thing about painting in this style of very simple base coats, building it back up from your darker contrast, is that you will either be able to spend a little bit of time, a lot of time, somewhere in between, and still get relatively the same result, just the level of polish at the end differs. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit the top part of the gums here because I'm just looking at them, and I thought, hey, let's just do that. These are getting a little bit more paint too, just because they are sitting directly on top, so they're gonna be hitting more of a reflection. And we're not worried about the gums on the bottom at all. They're just dark purple, right? So again, we're just trying to sell the idea that we have a light source from above. And then the tip of the tongue, I definitely want to hit a lot with this color because I want you to notice it more. I want the tip of the tongue to seem menacing. I'm sure if you were an adventurer and this guy was springing to life in front of you, it would be pretty menacing. So just something to grab the viewer's attention. Making sure I get that, and then gently pulling it across the tops in the center there to build more contrast. But you can see this tongue is coming to life. Side here. And whenever we're hitting the side of something like that, it's really just to help frame it and separate it depending on which angle. So because it's going to be very dark in the background, highlighting that edge just gives you another opportunity to see that there's like dimensional difference there, or there's more space in between those two sides. And then, of course, the webbing here. Just giving it a nice highlight. We want that to pop out more. Same thing on this side. And we're almost ready for that final color. Now then, if the final color we're applying isn't bright enough, we can just pick some white in with it and make it even brighter. I know, revolutionary stuff. Okay, so finally, I'm going for that purple 0. This is sort of like our real detailer, okay? Typically, the last color that I want to apply for things that we're going to work on projects for the Patreon will always be sort of our detailing color. Sometimes we can apply it a little bit, I would say harsher or more confidently. We're not really trying to taper it off necessarily, because we can immediately step back to the previous color to sort of soften up the edges. I feel like that's a easier approach for people that might not have like assassin-like, ability with the tip of their brush. Instead, they can just taper things a little bit easier. So we'll probably do that today just to get people used to it. But using our purple 0, it is that same magenta-y purple, just brought up with some white. And I'm going to start highlighting our way through. And it should look pretty pink, because all of our contrast is built on top of a cool tone purple. And you can see pulling it out on top of those ridges helps a lot. And there are little like pustule knobs or whatever on the side of the tongue. And so even though I haven't been highlighting those directly this whole time, I will apply our final highlight color directly on top because they're small. So sometimes it isn't really worth highlighting every step of the way really small details if you know at the end of a paint job it's going to be so small that you've repainted on top over and over and over. I think that's something too, sort of time management wise, that helps a lot of newer painters to figure out what you're actually wasting time painting versus where you should invest your time. And so when it comes to small details like raised bumps or even scratches, who cares, right? Just wait until the very end, because that's when it actually is going to show up. So that's what I'm paying attention to here. And there are tons of different details on this tongue. It is as disgustingly realistic as it could have been for this sculpt. And so now I'm just going through and adding these dots. Nothing, I don't think anyone can handle. And even if you aren't as accurate with your brush control, even if it's a little bit bigger dot, it's okay.
What would you say, consistency-wise, this paint is at right now?
It's still close to the what, there's always going to be some water mixed in with the paint that I do. I feel like it helps you use your paintbrush more like a pencil or a pen. You can just be more accurate with it. But I would say it's close to the 1-to-1 ratio. It's probably a little bit less. But because we are using this color in a more purposeful, opaque way, right? We're wanting to do dots and lines and these sort of final highlights. I don't want it to be incredibly thin because I won't be able to be as accurate with it. But you can tell we're pulling out all of these little gross details and having it with that 1-to-1 ratio versus like a 2-to-1 or something like that helps it out a lot. And I'm just making sure I'm going back through and dotting some of the edges of the tongue as well. So that way, dimensionally speaking, or looking at the depth of the sculpt, we know where the tongue lives. I know that sounds silly. We know where the tongue lives, okay. but it just helps your eye pick up on the size of the tongue, all of these little visual cues that exist in the sculpt suddenly sort of stand out more and spring to life. So now we've got our crazy purple tongue, and I'm gonna go ahead and hit the edges here of the webbing, just like that. Now, if you aren't a super confident person when it comes to doing small application, like I'm doing on the highlights there, you can always dry brush as well if you can be careful. It is a smaller area, so it might get a little bit messy, but you can probably clean up the metal afterwards since we haven't done that part yet. But I don't think it's too crazy. I'm just using like the edge of my brush at a 45-degree angle to pick up on those edges. And again, because the paint is thinned down to that 1-to-1 ratio, the tip of my brush is still really workable, so I can go in and grab those details. So I'm gonna go ahead and do maybe some dots and then the edge. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do an edge highlight on the end of the gum here where it meets the actual tooth. So I'm kind of lining that section between the tooth and the end of the gum there. Mostly because the wash that we put on top of everything darkened where the gum and the teeth meet. So I know I want that to be bright. Just want that nice definition between the two. And then I'll just kind of dot my way down the middle of each little ridge of gums. So that way we have a reflection and a little bit of texture to separate them, just like that. And then I'll just give them another look to make sure, can we see that this is the gums popping out? And I think the answer is yes. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the edge of these teeth down here. I sort of ignored them because it was such a small area, but that way you can see it highlights out the inside of the mouth there, and I'll do the same thing here. So just right where the gums pop out next to the webbed section allows you to say, oh yeah, there are gums right there. So cool, I think that is good on that. Why don't we do the teeth real quick? That'll be pretty simple. So just like we had a cool black, we also have a warm white. And if you guessed it, it's kind of like a warm ivory white. And I want to mix that in to highlight up the tan that we used on the teeth and the eyes. All right. Now then, we have our teeth washed down. I'm gonna go ahead and take our tan directly, 1-to-1 ratio mixed with that water, and using the information we left behind, I am going towards the, I'd say, front 50%, so to speak, of each tooth towards the end to bring that highlight out. So just reapplying again our base color. If I wanted these to be very clean, scary, sparkly teeth, then I would probably completely repaint the tooth. I wouldn't want to leave much of a shadowed edge towards where the gums begin. But since I know we're probably going to take this mini and apply like gross slime effects on the teeth, adding more contrast is definitely a good thing, but we don't need them to stand out like crazy. Now I'm going to mix 50-50 with our warm white into the watered down paint to make this a little bit brighter. Similar to our brighter purple color that we did all the details with, that's what I'm going to do with this application. I'm going for the tip of the teeth. Just like that. Make them look nice and sharp. We're gonna go even brighter on the very tips. I want them to be very dangerous and menacing. So I want them to be nice and sharp feeling. I applied a little bit too much on that tiny tooth, but it's okay. It's all right. I won't tell anyone if you don't, okay? Be cool.
I'm gonna tell everyone.
Be cool. All right, Spencer, I guess he's gonna tell everybody, but still. But you can see already, boom, we have a lot of contrast. And because these teeth stick up out at us, I know the tips are probably gonna show, and then I'm just gonna kind of drag the brush up from the bottom. You could flip the miniature upside down like this. Okay, wow. And then do it that way, like you were highlighting the other teeth. But you just have to remember, there's no real lighting coming from below on those teeth because they're in shadow. So I'm just worried about the tips of them. And the ones that are visible on the edge, I'll highlight up because you can see those from the side, but that's it. Awesome. And finally, I'm going to take that white color directly. I'm going to just add dots to the teeth to make them very, very bright on the ends. Of course, I say that, and I barely had any paint on the brush. There we go. Very, very bright. And I'm not worried about the teeth in that second row underneath the top ones here, but the bottom row of teeth are going to get a lot more of this applied on the gray tips just because they would obviously be glistening. But you can see now, those look pretty crazy. And then the tips of almost all of the bottom teeth I want to hit with this because they'd be wet and they're staring up at you, and that is the easiest way to send information to whoever may be looking at this paint job that there's a lot of things poking from the inside of that chest. Look at that, they just spring to life. Just like that. There's actually less teeth you can reach on this side. They're there. There we go. All right, now we have the eyes. Now then, I want the eyes to be really red. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take our white. I'm not gonna try and highlight up at all with anything. I'm just gonna literally coat these eyes with white the best that I can. Make sure nice and clean. I know mimics usually have red eyes. Red or like orange eyes or something a lot of the time, so we're just gonna make them very angry. As they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So the reason we're gonna do directly white so that our pigment that we apply on top is just very, very, very bright without us having to repaint a lot of it over and over. If you want your mimic to have white eyes, you can. I've done a mimic before with white eyes. Spencer knows that I've done this. And I thought it looked a little cartoony, so we're gonna just keep with the classic, okay? All right, so those eyes are gonna be drying pretty much instantly right now. There was not a lot of paint on there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take orange number 1, okay? Wild. And it is just a nice orange. Kind of like a lighter carrot tone, very bright. But the idea is that we're gonna apply some of the orange on top of the white, relatively thin. We're just gonna give it a nice, very vibrant base color. And then when we take our red, I'll apply it as a wash on top of the eye, and that should give us a lot of definition and a nice smooth transition to make it look really, really, really cool. So, I say cool, obviously warm colors. Okay, you get it, you get the idea. So I'm gonna apply this orange, look at that. Very, very bright because we're doing it thin on top of white. Pretty easy. Because it is, and it's just a 1-to-1 ratio of that water to paint, but I just barely have any on the tip of the brush, so I'm not glooping it on. I'm just going pretty thin on top of white. All of our paint has super strong pigment, so you can go really thin and still get awesome results. Look at that, it's already dry. And, you know, maybe we'll do another coat. We'll just make sure it's super solid. So again, one more little coat.
The nice part about painting thin too is you save a lot of paint.
Yeah, you save a lot of paint, you get more utility out of it, you get to paint faster, it means you paint more minis. Can't go wrong. There's nothing worse than applying too much paint and then realizing now I have to sit here and wait 4 or 5 minutes for something to dry. It's extremely counterintuitive, right? You wouldn't assume doing wet, thin paint would be faster. It is. Especially if you barely have any on the tip of your brush, because then it dries pretty much the second your brush comes off the miniature. All right, so now I've got my red. This is just red 3. So it isn't a super bright red, but it's enough to make a difference. I'm gonna get it pretty thin. So it's that wash consistency. Here, I'll show you. I only need a tiny amount, okay? Here it is. This is the consistency I want. This is where I put it, and then I just mixed it with water. So this is that wash consistency, like a 3-to-1, 2-to-1. You can see literally all the paint follows my brush, and it's now in my brush. Look, I'll suck it up. Whoop, it's gone, okay? But what I want to do with this is essentially wash it around the edges of each eye. So what that means is I'm just gonna push it on top of the eye and then around the edge in a circular motion, and then dot it in the center, and it's gonna start drying as a gradient because the surface tension isn't gonna break, and it's gonna give me the red effect that I want. And we're probably gonna do it twice, very similar to as applying the orange twice. And then I'll just let that dry. You can see it already, it looks pretty cool. Angry red eyes, but it'll dry a little bit more toned down because it's watered down. So while we are waiting on that, you know what we can do? We can start bringing up the brown. So I'm gonna get a little bit more of our original brown color. I already had some on the palette. I had way too much to begin with, so it's doing really well with my amount of guessingness today. I think that's what we would call that. Cool beans. Here we go. Now then, a lot of this wood is in shadow, okay? So I'm not concerned with highlighting every little piece. The other nice part about wood is that you don't have to have really smooth brush strokes. You can have texture because there is such a thing as wood grain, okay? So I'm just sort of taking my base color here that we had initially and putting it on top. It shouldn't be super noticeable. What I'm really paying attention to is applying it in between the different borders of each plank of wood meaning, okay? So that just means where the lines are there, I'm hitting it. And then any sort of more prominent piece of wood grain is where I'm applying it. Not gonna be super noticeable on this base color, just like the purple wasn't super noticeable the first time around, but we've got two other colors to apply on top of this. Now then, look, we left ourselves some information with that base color. You can see that highlight towards the center of each of these panels. Guess what? That's where I'm gonna go through and apply this. More so to the center, and I'm just letting my brush kind of trail off as it gets dark. Because the paint is a little bit wet, it should taper. What that means is it just sort of feathers its way out and gives us more of a gradient so that we can retain that nice shadow. It'll look like we did more work than we actually did if we do everything correctly. Same thing, the center where those eyes begin. The eyes look so funny. They're very, very scary looking now. Yeah, they're so funny, haha, as the mimic eats you. That's the goal, right? You want to laugh while you get killed by a creature. Alright, throw some of that in there. Now then, guess what? I'm not worried about that. Well, okay, I was trying to be cool. I'm going to throw a little bit in there. Okay, I was going to say I don't care about the bottom, but that's all I care about the bottom. Just enough to put some in. This side gets the same amount as the other side, which was right where these two planks kind of meet. And a little bit here. Okay, and I suppose we can do a little bit on the back portion, but not a lot. We want that to be in shadow more, so I'll throw some in the center. Okay, so now we have room for our next brown, but before I do that, before I do that, I'm gonna take our red one more time. One more go again. I'm gonna wash it on top. Very thin like a glaze. Before I just dolloped it on like a wash. Now this time I'm just literally aiming around the edge of each eye. And you don't really have to be precise at all. You just wanna leave that slightly brighter version in the center. So that way it's extremely menacing. Okay, look at this guy. It looks crazy. That's a crazy chest. All right, here we go. Serious business. This is orange number 4. This is one of my favorite browns, okay? Spencer and I, there's a lot of talk, okay, in the office whenever we're painting stuff about brown, all right? It's a thing we enjoy, okay? We talk about this brown being better than that brown. Do we enjoy a sienna? Do we enjoy a mahogany? Okay, there's all sorts of possibilities of what we enjoy. However, one of them ended up being orange number 4. Now, it's just a darker orange, all right? Or a very rich brown. That looks awesome. So that's what we're going to use for our first highlight color on top of our wood. Now then, on the tongue, we actually, mixed the two. This time around, I'm just going to go directly on top of the wood. So let's start where we can see it the easiest, which is going to be on the back here. And this is that same 1-to-1 ratio, making sure my brush is wet so I have nice control over it. And I'm going to go on the edge of the plank on the bottom and then highlight the wood grain. So the top edge of the wood grain here is what I'm aiming for with this color. It's going to add nice contrast, and then kind of tapering it down, feathering it down towards the center of the section to highlight it out, make it look nice. You can see it renders it out really well. Same thing on top.
This is one of my favorite paints in the range, I think.
Yeah, the orange 4. It's really good. I mean, what's nice about it, so it's the darkest orange color, right? That's why it's orange 4. So if you were using our other orange paints and you highlight it all the way up, it looks really good. But it's a secret brown, okay? So if you're doing wood or leather, it's also really, really great for leather. We will be using it a lot. Out of the brown, I mean, what's funny is like all of the browns that we have are really good. And as most miniature painters know, you will inevitably have a miniature that has like 5 different leathers and pouches and satchels and stuff all over them, right? And so you kind of always need a nice little gamut of utility browns, and so we have quite a few colors you can use. But yeah, this brown always does really well. So I'm just focusing it in right above the teeth a little bit more. Because this is an orange, color theory tells us orange and purple create a ton of contrast next to each other. So whether or not right underneath the eyes here, it would be as bright as I'm making it, I'm applying a little bit more than I have elsewhere. Even if that isn't necessarily true, it's just gonna help all of those colors stand out way more. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. Now then, I'm not gonna apply any more down there. I'm not going to apply any more on the bottom or here. I'll apply a little bit in between these planks on the side. The reason I'm not doing that is I know that it's just going to be darker in general the further down the body we go, and I don't want that wood to look like it's bright for any reason, so I'm going to let it be darker. We want the focus of the paint job to be the eyes, the tongue, and the mouth. So anything that we do really should be working to enhance that, and I don't want to make the bottoms of any of it really sort of stand out. I want it to look really, really realistic and nice. So there's that. Okay. So we're going to use the tan we've already used, and I'm going to use that with the orange number 4. We're going to mix those two together, and that's going to be our final highlight on the wood. I almost dipped my paintbrush into the cap with other paint on it. That's rookie mistake. Don't do that. Terrible. That's why we can't have nice things. I ruin them. Okay. So I mixed it 50-50. This is actually a nice base for like a skin tone if you're doing a really tan skin tone, but we're not, I mean, okay, so here's the question. Aren't we doing a skin tone, technically? I mean, I know we're painting wood, right? But if the wood is its skin, or is a mimic more like a hermit crab? Is it the shell? Just ponder that. Look, I wouldn't say I'm a philosopher, but maybe I am, okay? Just ponder that, think about it. Does that mean the mimics then crawl out of the objects that they're living in? I don't know. Look, I'm just asking the questions we're all wondering, all right?
Someone has the answer to this question.
Someone has the answer. It's not me. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's you. Yeah, if you watch this video, pop into our Discord and say, hey, it definitely is like a mimic crab, or a mimic crab. I would love to see a mimic crab as well. A hermit crab. It outgrows an object, so it moves from a treasure chest to a desk. Who knows? But you can see I'm using this color, and I'm literally making all of the wood grain pop. That's all I'm doing is popping out the little texture. Now then, moving closer to the eyes. I'm gonna go ahead and hit this edge here. Nice straight line. And then I'm just gonna sort of fake some wood grain. So I'm just kind of dragging my brush through because we want that nice contrast right on the eyes towards that tongue. Flip it this way, I have a better angle. Right underneath the eye. So what's funny is I'm using this kind of like as eyeshadow, right, when you think about it. But I'm lining the eyes with a brighter color because I want it to look like the wood is brighter. You know, look, I've already explained this, okay? I'm not gonna repeat it an 18th time. You've heard me explain it enough. Reason being, when you look at it straight on, you've just got way more definition. And then, I'm not gonna throw any on the sides. I'm not gonna throw any on the bottom. It was literally just on the top. Look, now it exists, we did it. We did it, we did it. So now, we've got what? We've got the metal, and then whatever we're gonna do to the eyes. So here's what I'm gonna do to the eyes. Here's a little trick. If you're not doing white eyes with a pupil, okay, and you're doing something that's more animalistic, don't do the pupil at all. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take that final bright orange, or sorry, the first bright orange we used to coat the eyes, I'm gonna mix it with white. It's gonna be very, very, very bright. It's like a very pastel-y, almost white, but it's still orange color. And I'm gonna dot the eye. So we're not doing a pupil, but we are gonna add a reflection, make it nice and creepy. So I'm gonna do one big dot in the top right corner, and then one right underneath it. Just like that. Look at that. Now we have a critter eye. Okay? Look at that. You can do critter eyes too at home. Look at that. You just do one big one in the top, one on bottom. Wow. Close enough. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Look, it doesn't have to be a perfect science, okay? It's still artwork, but one dot, little dot. Now then, the technique video for this set of miniatures that we're shipping out is also about painting eyes, because we have another creature with multiple eyes, so we're going to really focus on that. But adding a nice gleam reflection to the eyes is a good way to make them creepy. Now they're also finished, which is cool. Then, using that same orange, it's already on the palette. I didn't need to get this in my hand at all. I just like talking to you. Okay.
You just wanted to see your face.
Well, I'm looking at the... Okay, I looked at my face. If you see me glance up, now I look. But I just wanted to talk. Okay. I already had it. Psych. Just kidding. Didn't need to do that. So what I'm going to do, with that red, that orange, I'm going to mix it down a little bit. We're just going to pretend this is some rust. Did you like the inflection on that? Some rust. We're going to pretend this is rust. I have it watered down in a 1-to-1 ratio. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through around some of these rivets, some of the bolts. I don't know how they constructed this thing. I'm just using hardware words at this point, okay? And I'm just going to run it along the edges so that it looks like, you know, we got a little bit of a rusty chest mimic scenario going on. Again, I doubt this mimic is inside of the treasure chest store, so it's not brand new. I mean, imagine going to a Lowe's or Home Depot and everything inside of it is a mimic. I mean, you know, it'd be pretty scary. Put your food in the fridge, open it up, it's just gone. So I'm just applying this rusty color before I do any of the highlighting on the metal. Reason being, I want to create a little bit more contrast with color rather than just shiny stuff. I think that's a good way to describe it. Shiny stuff. But reason being, right, if I haven't been applying a bunch of highlights all the way through the further down the body we go, which I haven't been, right, we've talked about it, I would rather do it with some color. I think that helps a lot more than just tons of reflection back towards you. I would rather highlight our silver on the edges and not just the flat surfaces. I think that's just going to render it out a lot better for you. So I'm just kind of going through. You don't have to hit every single one. I'm just very haphazardly throwing the paint on there. And if you feel like you got it on top, just wipe it off. I mean, come on, it's rust. It doesn't have to be precise. I mean, come on, it's rust over here, okay? Cool. Being very negligent on the bottom edge, but maybe you can apply a little bit more towards one of the edges there and just sort of wipe it off. Let it be very rusty. And if you want any kind of texture, literally just drag and kind of swirl your brush, tip of your brush, and it will look rusty enough, okay? Weathering things is one of Spencer's favorite things to do whilst painting.
Pretty fun.
He likes weathering wood as well. That's another thing. You can apply some greens and some... Actually, we haven't done that. We should throw some greens on this.
You get the finger paint.
You do. You get the finger paint. The next thing you know, you're in the bathroom again, washing your hands for the 15th time in a day. It happens. Okay, so now we have rust, so let's add our final little weathering fun. I've got green, number 1, which is what I would describe as a grassy green, a goblin-y green, a very use it for almost everything kind of green. Cool. I'm gonna take that. Guess what? That's right, 1-to-1 ratio of paint. You guys are so smart. You got it figured out now. So smart. If only I had started off as smart as you. And I'm just gonna take this and layer it in to some of the corners of the wood where it meets the metal and down the center of a few of the planks. Now it's gonna look very bright and in your face while it's wet, but when it dries, it'll mellow out. And we're just gonna assume that this is some moss, some fungus, some whatever vegetation growing, because again, our chest has been here, our mimic has been here waiting for food, for adventurers, for who knows how long. It is ravenous. It is gonna treat your party of 5 adventurers like an order from Five Guys. You are in trouble, and the fries are nearly bottomless. So I'm just kind of letting it go in between the wood grain texture, and then, like Spencer said, hey, just use your finger. And you're just adding visual interest, that's all. Just so you have a little pop of color here and there. Again, we use that brighter orange for the rust because guess what? It's gonna contrast just like the eyes did with the purple tongue. All of it works together to sell the idea of a very old, nasty chest. I'll add a little bit on the face, but not a lot. I don't want it to really be too busy because we already have like so many things going on. Awesome. Okay, cool. So I still have some of the, I just grabbed the wrong brush, that's cool. I still have some of the metal here on the palette, so I'm just gonna grab that. It's still active, ready to rock and roll. Get it on the brush. Oops, I mixed it with water. I didn't wanna do that. Okay, so, awesome. I'm gonna take the edge of my brush and hit the edges of the metal. So that way it is shiny whenever you're looking at it, but I don't wanna highlight stuff up all the way. I lied, I wanna do the handle. If you wanna do some texture, you can just drag your brush like that, and it'll just look like some scratches. You can see it bounce back. So, we still want it to be dark, but you can dot, drag your brush, do texture. We just don't want to kill the grime that we applied at the very beginning. We don't want it to be too shiny, too bright, but there you go. As long as it pops back, it'll be good. If you went with a really bright silver, and then you got it really, really dirty, you do want to be careful. This is already, it's gunmetal, like I said at the beginning, so it's darker. But if you got it really dirty, really dark, and you're using, you know, super bright silver for the highlight, just try and hit the edges only, and you should be okay. Now across the top, because it is a round edge, it will be reflecting a lot more. So I am reflecting a little bit more across the rounded edge there. I'll do the same thing on this side. But I just am following good highlight etiquette by paying attention to the shape. Maybe that's a class we can do. Good highlight etiquette 101. It is as simple as that. Hitting the sides, some of the edges of the rivets, and once again, this handle. Okay, so I think we can probably highlight the eyelids. I know I did them that coppery bronzy color, but I do have gold. So I'm gonna take gold and we're just gonna do the eyelid again, like some eyeshadow, make it pop, and then I'll throw some paint on the base to pretend like we painted the base. There's really like nothing visible, so I'll just throw a darker color. Okay, so right across the top there, a nice pop of gold. Pop of gold. Look at that. Nice contrast yet again. And then I already have a bunch of dark colors on the palette, so I'm going to mix them together and just make a really gross dark brown. Throw that on top of the stone. You can come back and paint the stone whatever color you please. I'm just throwing something on it relatively thin so that it doesn't stare back out at us like primer. And lastly but not least, I'm gonna throw some black around the edge of that base, and our mimic is done. So these are all very basic techniques that we can do very fast paint jobs with. Whenever we were painting for the Patreon, sometimes we would have to go fast, sometimes we would go slower, but in our personal lives, when we're painting for tabletop play, big armies, you name it, I know I use a lot of these techniques, and it's an easy way to get really nice results very quickly. So again, with this miniature, depending on when you're seeing this video, we also have a video of how to do some really gross slime effects coming out of the teeth and tongue. So you're getting kind of a 2-for-1 on how to paint this guy and do something else that you can apply on other minis. But hopefully you had a good time painting him up. I think it looks really good. Spencer, what do you think? Do I get to do another video?
I think you do. I'm
Okay.
gonna give 2 thumbs up right now.
Wow, Clem Fandango, 2 thumbs up. I love that. Shout out to Clem Fandango fans out there. Okay, so that's it. That was easy. You guys did it. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Again, if you painted this, join our Discord, send us a photo, share it on social media. We'll give you feedback. We love seeing it, all that jazz. Thanks so much. We'll catch you on the next video. Have a good one.